After the funeral, they handed me keys to a forgotten silo. What I built inside changed everything. If you're finding this story for the first time, maybe think about subscribing. We talk about second chances here, about finding a foundation when the world tries to convince you there's nothing but open air beneath your feet. The man in the ill-fitting suit cleared his throat, a dry rustle of paper and discomfort. His name was Mr. Abernathy, and he smelled like mothballs and stale coffee, the official scent of the system I was finally aging out of. We were standing in the vestibule of a funeral home that felt too warm, the air thick with the scent of lilies and the quiet, polite grief of strangers. My grandmother's funeral. I'd met her 3 times in my 18 years, each visit a blur of awkward silence and the taste of peppermint candies she'd press into my palm. Yet, here I was, the sole beneficiary, the last branch on a family tree that had been whittled down to a stump. Mr. Abernathy adjusted his tie, which was already perfectly, miserably straight. "Leo," he began, his voice the auditory equivalent of beige carpeting. "As your transitional case manager, my official duties are concluded as of today, your 18th birthday." He said birthday like it was a medical condition. He didn't mention the funeral, the casket, the quiet hum of the air conditioning that seemed to be the only thing mourning. He pushed a large manila envelope into my hands. It was heavy, weighted with the bureaucracy of a life I was supposed to start living. "Inside you'll find your final paperwork, your birth certificate, social security card, and the release of trust funds." He paused, letting the last 3 words hang in the air. I almost laughed. Trust funds made it sound like I was some forgotten heir to a fortune. In reality, it was $1,742, the accumulated pittance from state benefits that had been set aside for me, barely enough for a security deposit on a room somewhere gray and temporary. "And this," he said, pulling a small, tarnished object from his pocket. It was a key, a single, heavy, old-fashioned skeleton key attached to a simple brass ring. It felt cold and solid in my palm, an anchor in the dizzying heat of the room. "Your grandmother, Elena, her will was specific. She left you her property. The deed is in the envelope. The lawyer's contact information is there as well. A Mr. Davies. He handled the estate." I looked from the key to his face. His expression was a careful blank, a mask of professional neutrality he'd probably worn for 1,000 other kids just like me. Kids spat out of the system on their 18th birthday, blinking in the sudden, terrifying sunlight of freedom. "Property?" I asked, my voice sounding thin. "What property?" "It's rural," he said, a slight, almost imperceptible shrug in his shoulders. "Upstate. The address is on the deed. That's the key to the main structure." He started to turn away, his duty done. The checklist in his mind was complete. Item 1. Deliver ward to final family obligation. Item 2. Transfer legal documents. Item 3. Hand over key to bewildering inheritance. Check, check, check. Now he could go back to his office and file my life away in a cabinet marked closed. "Wait," I said, and the word had more force than I intended. He stopped, turning back with a flicker of impatience. "What is it? What kind of structure?" A thin, dry smile touched his lips, the first real expression I'd seen on his face. It wasn't a kind one. "A silo, Leo. A decommissioned grain silo on a few acres of scrubland. Congratulations. You're a property owner." He walked away then, his sensible shoes squeaking on the polished linoleum, leaving me standing alone in the heavy, floral air, with a key to a life I couldn't begin to imagine. The bus ride upstate was a long, rattling journey through a landscape that bled from gray concrete to weary suburbs, and finally into the deep, bruised greens and browns of the countryside. I watched the world through the grimy window, the $1,700 a tight, anxious knot in my pocket. The envelope from Mr. Abernathy sat on my lap, a heavy, unread testament to my new reality. I didn't open it. I knew what was inside. Papers that would try to define me, to summarize 18 years of foster homes and group facilities into a series of codes and addresses. I wasn't ready to face that. Not yet. Instead, I focused on the key. I held it in my hand, the metal warming to my touch. A silo. What did a person do with a silo? What kind of person bought one in the first place? My grandmother, Elena, was a ghost to me. A woman in a faded photograph, her face kind but distant. The social workers had told me stories, that she was young when my mother was born, that she'd struggled, that she'd made the difficult choice to give my mother up for a better life. A life my mother had then spectacularly failed to live, leaving me to the care of the state she'd run from. Elena had sent birthday cards. They always arrived a week late, the cursive inside shaky, the $5 bill tucked inside feeling like an apology. Now she had left me a concrete tube in the middle of nowhere. It felt less like a gift and more like a riddle, or a burden. The bus let me off at a crossroads with a blinking yellow light and a gas station that looked like it had been closed for a decade. The air smelled different here, clean, sharp, with the scent of pine and damp earth. The directions Mr. Davies, the lawyer, had given me over the phone were simple. Follow the old county road for about 2 miles. You'll see it. You can't miss it. His voice had been like his name, dry and professional. But there was an undertone of something else. Pity? Curiosity? He told me the property taxes were 2 years overdue. The county would seize it in 6 months if they weren't paid. The development company, West Ridge Holdings, had already made an offer. A generous one, he'd called it. Enough to set me up somewhere. Enough to make the silo and my grandmother a distant memory. The walk was longer than 2 miles, or at least it felt like it. My backpack, containing everything I owned, dug into my shoulders. The road was cracked asphalt, weeds pushing their way through like stubborn green thoughts. And then I saw it. Mr. Davies was right. You couldn't miss it. It rose from a small clearing, a massive pale gray cylinder against a darkening sky. It was monolithic, alien, a forgotten monument to a forgotten industry. It was bigger than I had imagined, maybe 100 feet tall, its metal cap rusted to a deep, angry orange. Next to it stood a small, dilapidated farmhouse, its windows boarded up, its porch sagging like a tired mouth. A collapsed barn lay nearby, a skeleton of rotting wood. The whole place was being slowly swallowed by nature, choked by vines and overgrown grass. It didn't look abandoned. It looked defeated. The gate was chained, but the lock was so rusted it crumbled in my hand. I walked onto the property, the crunch of gravel under my feet the only sound. A feeling of profound loneliness washed over me. This was my inheritance. A tower of concrete and a pile of debt. A final, cryptic message from a woman I barely knew. I approached the farmhouse first. The door was swollen shut, but I put my shoulder into it, and it groaned open into a cloud of dust and the smell of decay. The inside was a wreck. Furniture was draped in white sheets, ghostly shapes in the dim light slanting through the boarded windows. Raccoons had clearly made it their home. The floor was littered with debris, the wallpaper peeling in long, curling strips. There was nothing here for me. No answers, no sense of connection, just rot. Leaving the house, I turned to the silo. A heavy steel door was set into its base, painted a faded red, a stark slash of color against the gray concrete. There was a single, heavy-duty lock. I took out the key. My hand was trembling slightly as I slid it into the keyhole. It resisted, stiff from years of disuse. I put my other hand on it, turned with all my strength, and felt a deep, grinding click as the tumblers finally gave way. The sound echoed in the quiet air. I pulled the handle, and the heavy door scraped open a few inches, releasing a gust of cool, musty air. It smelled like stone and earth and time. I squeezed through the opening and into the darkness. It took a moment for my eyes to adjust. The inside was vast, cavernous. The circular walls soared up into the gloom, converging at a single point of light far, far above, a small opening in the roof. The acoustics were surreal. My own breathing sounded loud, immense. A thick layer of dust and debris covered the concrete floor. In the center of the vast, empty space sat a single object, a heavy, military green footlocker. It was the only thing in the entire structure. It looked small and deliberate in the immense emptiness. It had its own lock, a smaller, newer-looking padlock. I walked towards it, my footsteps echoing like drumbeats. Why this? Why leave an empty concrete tower with a single locked box in the middle of it? I circled the footlocker. There was no key. Of course there wasn't. It wouldn't be that easy. I ran my hands over the cool metal, feeling the latches, the hinges. Taped to the underside, my fingers brushed against a small, flat object. An envelope, a small sealed envelope with a single word written on it in that familiar, shaky cursive. Leo. My breath caught in my throat. This was it. This was the message. My hands were clumsy as I tore it open. Inside wasn't a letter. It was another key, smaller this time for the padlock. And tucked behind it, a folded piece of paper. It was a note, just a few lines. Leo, the past is heavy. Some people run from it. I decided to build a place to store it, a place strong enough to keep it safe. The choice of what to do with it is yours now. Be brave. Love, Elena. The past is heavy. I looked up at the towering, empty space around me. It felt like a tomb, or a vault. I used the small key on the padlock. It clicked open easily. With a deep breath, I lifted the heavy lid of the footlocker. The inside was packed to the brim. There were no jewels, no gold bars, no hidden fortune. It was filled with letters, dozens and dozens of them, bundled together with twine, all addressed to me. And on top of the first bundle was a thick, brown, leather-bound journal. I sat down on the dusty concrete floor, the single beam of light from above illuminating the space around me, and I opened the journal. The first page was dated 18 years ago, the day I was born. My dearest Leo, it began, you are 1 hour old, and I am already a grandmother. And I am already a liar. I have to give you up, not because I don't love you, but because I love you too much to let you be caught in the storm that is our family. I spent the next several hours in that silo, the world outside fading away as I fell into my grandmother's words. The journal was her confession, her history, her apology. She wrote about my mother, a bright, beautiful girl who had fallen in with a dangerous man. My father. He wasn't just a bad boyfriend. He was involved in something criminal, something that had put a target on their backs. Your mother chose him, she wrote, and in choosing him, she was lost to me. They were running, always running, from the law, from his partners. When you were born, I knew I couldn't let them take you with them. It would not have been a life. It would have been a cage or a coffin. Elena had made a deal. She'd used her life savings to buy my mother a chance to disappear, on the condition that she leave me with her. My mother agreed. But the people my father was involved with didn't just let things go. They were looking for him, for my mother, for anything they could use as leverage. That meant me. So I did the only thing I could think of, the journal continued. I made you disappear too. I put you into the foster care system, a place of 1 million anonymous children. I told them I was unable to care for you. I broke my own heart to keep you safe. I became a ghost in your life so you could have one. The letters were all for me, one written for every birthday she had missed. They were filled with the small, mundane details of her life, her thoughts, her hopes for me. She wrote about the job she took as a night cleaner, about the small apartment she lived in, about the ache in her heart every time she saw a boy your age. She had followed my life from a distance, getting what little information she could from overworked social workers. She knew which homes I'd been in. She knew when I'd gotten into a fight in the 7th grade and when I'd won the school science fair in the 10th. She had been a constant, invisible presence. The last entry in the journal was from 6 months ago. Her handwriting was frail, spider-like. I'm sick, Leo. The doctors say it's not long now. I've spent the last 10 years preparing for this. Everything I saved, every extra shift I worked, went into this place. This ugly, beautiful, strong place. She explained how she'd bought the foreclosed property for a pittance. The silo, to everyone else, was a useless relic. To her, it was a fortress. It was the safest place she could imagine. I wanted to give you a home, she wrote, but I realized I couldn't give you a normal one. So I gave you a foundation, something strong, something no one can ever take from you. Inside this box, you will find everything I have saved. It's not a fortune, but it's a start. There's also another box, a smaller one, hidden beneath the floorboards of the old house. The loose one by the hearth. In it, you'll find the truth about your father's business, and the names of the men he was involved with. Evidence I collected over years. It's dangerous, Leo. It's a weapon. You can use it to get justice, or you can bury it and walk away. I couldn't make that choice for you, but I could give you the option. I finally closed the journal as the sun began to set, the light from the opening above fading from white to gold to a deep, dusty purple. My body ached from sitting on the concrete for so long. My eyes burned from reading, and from tears I hadn't realized I was crying. I cried for the grandmother I never knew. I cried for the protection I never understood. I cried for the little boy who thought he'd been abandoned when all along he'd been fiercely, secretly loved. She hadn't left me a burden. She had left me a legacy, a story, and a choice. I found the loose floorboard in the farmhouse exactly where she said it would be. Beneath it was a small metal strongbox. I didn't need a key for this one. It was unlocked. Inside was a stack of papers held together by a thick rubber band and a small, old-model USB drive. I scanned the documents. They were photocopies of ledgers, names, transaction dates, offshore account numbers. It was a detailed record of a criminal enterprise. It was the weapon she'd described. Heavy, dangerous, As I stood there, the dust motes dancing in the last ray of twilight, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me press the green button. "Leo, it's Mark Davies, Elena's attorney." His voice was just as I remembered from our brief call. "I hope I'm not disturbing you. I just received a new offer for the property. From West Ridge Holdings. It's substantial. $75,000. As is, no inspections. They want the land for a new commercial development. Given the back taxes and the state of the property, it's more than a fair offer. It's a windfall. It could be a real fresh start for you, son." I looked around the dilapidated room, at the strongbox in my hands, and I thought of the cavernous, quiet silo next door. A fresh start. He was offering me an escape hatch, a way to take the money and run, to leave all this heavy history behind me. I could disappear, just like my mother did. I could be free of the silo, the taxes, the dangerous information in this box. $75,000 felt like all the money in the world. It was safety. It was an apartment, a car, a life without the constant worry that had been my shadow for 18 years. And I just sat there, with this choice in front of me. Have you ever had a moment like that? A fork in the road where you just knew, that who you were about to become depended entirely on which way you turned. A choice between the easy path that led away from your past, and the hard one that led right through the heart of it. Now let's get back to what happened. I stood there in the growing darkness of that ruined farmhouse, the lawyer's voice a tinny, expectant buzz in my ear. "Leo, are you there?" I took a deep breath, the air thick with the dust of years. "I'm here," I said, my own voice sounding strange to me, stronger than before. I thought of my grandmother's words, "Be brave." What was the brave choice here? Running felt like what my mother had done. It felt like what everyone expected the kid from the system to do. Take the money, forget the past, survive. But my grandmother hadn't survived. She had fought. She had planned. She had built. She had left me not just a place, but a purpose. Selling it felt like selling her memory. It felt like a betrayal of the 18 years she'd spent watching over me from the shadows. "The offer," I said slowly, deliberately. "Tell them no." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear Mr. Davies adjusting his tie, reevaluating the file he had on me. The file that probably described me as at risk, unstable, a prime candidate for a quick and easy payout. "Leo," he said, his tone shifting from professional to something more cautious, more paternal. "I have to advise you, this is likely the best offer you will receive. The back taxes alone are over $5,000. The county will auction the property in less than 6 months. You don't have the resources to—" "I'll find them," I interrupted. It was a bluff. I had $1,700 and a box of dangerous secrets. But saying the words out loud made them feel possible. "The property is not for sale." Another pause. Then a sigh. "All right, Leo. It's your decision. I will inform Westridge. If you need anything, my number is on the card I gave you." He sounded defeated, or maybe just confused. He hung up. I stood in the silence, the phone feeling heavy in my hand. I had just turned down a fortune. I had just committed myself to an impossible task. And for the first time since I'd stepped off that bus, I didn't feel lost. I felt anchored. The first thing I did was open the footlocker again and find the stash of money my grandmother had mentioned. It was tucked at the very bottom, beneath the last bundle of letters. It wasn't $75,000, but it was more than I'd ever seen in my life. Tightly bound stacks of 20s and 50s, sealed in plastic bags. I counted it twice. $11,000. Her life savings, converted to cash. Enough to pay the back taxes, and enough to live on for a little while. Enough for a start. The next day, I took a bus to the county seat, a small town with a tidy courthouse and a sense of sleepy, unhurried importance. I walked into the tax assessor's office, the bundle of cash a nervous lump in my backpack. I paid the $5,312 in full. The clerk, a woman with kind eyes and a mountain of white hair, counted the money with a practiced efficiency. When she handed me the receipt, stamped, "Paid in full," she gave me a small smile. "Your grandmother, Elena," she said softly. "She was a good woman, quiet. Came in here every year to ask about the taxes, but never quite had enough to pay. Said she was saving it for her grandson. Glad to see you taking care of the place." I walked out of that courthouse feeling 10 feet tall. I had a deed. I had a paid-up property. I had a home. It was a wreck, but it was mine. The work was harder than I could have ever imagined. The first week was just clearing. I started with the farmhouse, throwing out the ruined furniture, tearing out the moldy carpets, scrubbing the floors until my knuckles were raw. I bought supplies at the local hardware store, a place run by a grizzled old man named Sal, who looked me up and down with suspicion on my first visit. "You're the kid who bought the old silo property," he said. It wasn't a question. "What are you planning on doing with it?" "Fixing it up," I said. He grunted, a sound that could have meant anything. "Lot of work. You'll need a tetanus shot just to walk around that barn." But he sold me the tools I needed, and he even threw in a box of heavy-duty trash bags for free. Over the next few weeks, I became a regular. I'd come in, covered in dust and grime, and ask for advice on plumbing, or wiring, or how to deal with a wasp nest the size of a football. Sal never smiled, but he always had the right answer. He'd sketch diagrams on scraps of paper, explain the difference between copper and PVC, and tell me which brand of sealant wouldn't fail in the winter. He was teaching me, in his own gruff way, how to build. The silo was the real challenge. It was a giant, empty canvas. What had my grandmother intended for it? A place to store the past, she'd written. A place strong enough to keep it safe. I decided to honor that. I wasn't just going to live here. I was going to build something meaningful. My first project was power. I used a chunk of the remaining money to buy a small used generator and a book on basic electrical wiring. The nights were the hardest. The silence of the countryside was absolute, and the silo, with its strange echoes and deep shadows, could feel menacing. But with a single string of work lights running from the generator, the space was transformed. It became a workshop, a cathedral of possibility. I spent my days cleaning, scrubbing the concrete walls, patching the few cracks I could find. I bought a cheap cot and moved into the silo, sleeping in the vast, circular room. The farmhouse was a long-term project, but the silo felt like the heart of the place. It felt safe. One evening, a sleek black car I didn't recognize pulled up to my gate. A man in an expensive suit got out. He was tall, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Leo?" he asked, walking towards me. "My name is Mr. Thompson. I'm with West Ridge Holdings." I stayed where I was, a shovel in my hand. "I'm not selling." His smile widened. "I know what your lawyer said, but sometimes lawyers don't communicate the full picture. 75,000 was our initial offer. For a quick, clean sale, we're prepared to offer 100,000, and we'll handle all the closing costs." He made it sound so simple, so reasonable. $100,000. I could have walked away and never looked back. I could have a real house, a real life. But I looked back at the silo, its gray form solid against the evening sky, and I thought of Elena's letters. I thought of her quiet fight. The answer is still no, I said. Thompson's smile finally faltered. His eyes hardened. It's a ruin, kid. You're sitting on a pile of concrete and weeds. Don't be sentimental. Take the money. It's my home, I said. The words felt true as I said them. He stared at me for a long moment, then shook his head, a look of genuine disbelief on his face. We'll get the land eventually, he said, his voice low and cold. There are other ways. Zoning violations, eminent domain. It's just a matter of time. He got back in his car and drove away, leaving a cloud of dust behind. The threat hung in the air, but it didn't scare me. It energized me. This wasn't just about fixing up a property anymore. It was a fight. That night, I finally looked at the USB drive from the strongbox. I plugged it into a cheap second-hand laptop I'd bought in town. It contained scanned copies of the same documents in the box, but also audio files. Recordings. My grandmother, I realized, had been far more cunning than I'd ever imagined. They were conversations, secretly recorded. Men with rough voices talking about shipments, payments, problems. One of the voices was my father's. Hearing it sent a chill down my spine. He sounded nervous, out of his depth. The other voices were cold, professional. They were the men my grandmother had been hiding from. These recordings, combined with the ledgers, weren't just a weapon. They were a nuke. I didn't know what to do with them. Going to the police felt dangerous, not just for me, but for the memory of my parents. Exposing these men could bring a world of trouble down on my head. My grandmother had left the choice to me, and I understood why. For now, I decided, the silo would do what it was built for. It would keep the past safe. I started to build. I used the remaining money to buy lumber, insulation, and drywall. With Sal's advice and a lot of trial and error, I began to frame out a small living space inside the base of the silo. A small room, a kitchen area, a bathroom. It was slow, back-breaking work. Every muscle in my body ached. I made countless mistakes, wasted material, had to tear things down and start again. But with every wall I framed, with every screw I drove, I felt like I was building not just a home, but myself. The community, in its own quiet way, started to help. Sal would accidentally order too much of something I needed and sell me the surplus at a deep discount. A local farmer named George started dropping off fresh vegetables and eggs once a week, refusing any payment. Elena used to talk about you, he said one day, leaning against his dusty pickup truck. Said you were a good kid. Glad to see you're honoring her. I learned that my grandmother hadn't been a recluse. She had been a quiet part of this community, and they had looked out for her. Now they were looking out for me. Months passed. The small apartment within the silo took shape. It was strange, living inside a circle, but I grew to love it. The thick concrete walls kept it cool in the summer and held the heat from my small wood stove in the winter. It was quiet, peaceful, secure. One day, a certified letter arrived. It was from the county zoning board. A complaint had been filed by West Ridge Holdings, citing improper residential use of an agricultural structure. There was to be a hearing. My heart sank. This was what Thompson had threatened. They were going to use the system to crush me. I called Mr. Davies. I expected him to say, "I told you so." But he didn't. "I was afraid of this," he said, his voice grim. They play hardball. But don't panic. We have options. Get all your receipts together. Document all the work you've done. We can file for a zoning variance. It's a long shot, but it's not impossible. The hearing was a month later. I stood before a board of 5 stern-faced local officials. Mr. Thompson was there, flanked by 2 lawyers in sharp suits. He laid out his case calmly, presenting the silo as a dangerous, unlivable structure, an eyesore, a liability. He painted me as a naive squatter, ignorant of the law. When it was my turn, I was terrified. My hands shook as I laid out my photos, my receipts, my plans. I talked about my grandmother. I talked about what the property meant to me. I didn't talk about home or love or legacy. I talked about property taxes and improvements and my right to be there. I tried to speak their language. It felt hopeless. They were business people. What did they care about some kid's sentimental project? At the end of my presentation, the chairman looked over his glasses at me. "Son, what exactly are you planning to do with the rest of that structure? It's an awful lot of space for one person." My mind went blank. I hadn't thought that far ahead. My only goal had been to stay, to survive. I looked out at the small audience. Sal was there. George the farmer was there. The clerk from the tax office. A handful of other faces I recognized from town. They were watching me, their expressions steady, supportive. And an idea, something that had been percolating in the back of my mind, suddenly became clear. "It's not just for me," I said, the words coming out stronger than I felt. "My grandmother saved things. She believed in keeping the past safe. I want to turn the silo into an archive, a local archive, for town records, family histories, photographs. A place to store the things that matter, the things that make this community what it is." I was making it up as I went along, but the more I said it, the more right it felt. It was exactly what Elena would have wanted. A place to store the past. Not just her past, everyone's. A silence fell over the room. Mr. Thompson scoffed audibly. The board members looked at each other, whispering. Finally, the chairman cleared his throat. "The board will take this under advisement. We will issue our decision in 30 days. The 30 days that followed were the longest of my life. I kept working, but the threat of losing everything hung over me. West Ridge's pressure increased. Surveyors showed up at my property line. I received another letter, this one from their lawyers, offering a final settlement of $150,000. It was a test, a way to see if my resolve was cracking. I threw the letter in the wood stove. On the 29th day, a thick envelope arrived from the county. I sat at the small table I had built, my hands trembling as I opened it. I read the legal jargon, my eyes scanning for the key words. Variance granted. I read the sentence 3 times. I had won. They had approved my plan, on the condition that I form a non-profit and meet specific building codes within 2 years. It wasn't a final victory, but it was a fighting chance. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding for a month. That night, I made another decision. I took the USB drive, put it in an envelope with an anonymous note explaining what it was, and mailed it to a journalist at a major newspaper known for investigative reporting. I didn't want justice for my father. I didn't want revenge. I just wanted the threat to be gone. I wanted the secrets out of my silo. I wanted to fill it with something else. The story broke 2 months later. It was a massive scandal, implicating powerful people. Arrests were made. West Ridge Holdings, it turned out, was a subsidiary of a larger corporation with ties to the criminal network. Their aggressive push for my land suddenly made sense. It wasn't just about development, it was about silencing a secret. With the scandal public, they vanished. The offers stopped. The legal challenges ceased. They had bigger problems now. The silo was finally, truly mine. The real work began then. Building an archive was 1,000 times more complicated than building a small apartment. I had to learn about climate control, preservation, cataloging. I formed a board for the nonprofit, with Sal, George, and a retired librarian from town as its first members. People started donating things. Boxes of old photographs from the local historical society, forgotten town ledgers, family Bibles with generations of names written in the front. The silo, once empty, began to fill up. It was filling up with stories. It's been 2 years now. The silo is a different place. The ground floor is my small, compact home. Above it, connected by a spiral staircase I built with Sal's help, are 3 levels of climate-controlled archival shelving. We call it the Elena Project. It's a place of quiet, of memory. School groups come to visit. People come from all over the county to research their family history. It's not just a building anymore. It's the heart of the community. I never became rich. I live simply. But I wake up every morning in a place that I built, surrounded by a history I chose to protect. My grandmother left me an inheritance, but it wasn't the land or the money or even the silo itself. It was the choice. The choice to turn a place of secrets and sorrow into a place of history and hope. She gave me a foundation, and she trusted me to build something on it that would last. That's my story, or at least this chapter of it. It's a story about how the heaviest burdens can sometimes become our strongest foundations. It's about realizing that home isn't just a place you find. It's a place you build, sometimes with nothing more than a key, a promise, and a little bit of help from the people around you. If this story meant something to you, if you've ever had to build a home out of something everyone else saw as empty or broken, then this community is I promise you, I will read it. Because every story deserves a place to be kept safe.